What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eastern Current. We got a really cool episode planned today. Through my buddies at iStrike, they've connected me with the president of ZMAN, and just excited to introduce y'all to him in a second. And we're going to have him kind of tell us his story, his fishing story, how he got into inshore and saltwater fishing, as well as a deep look at ZMAN fishing products and why they're such incredible soft plastics for inshore fishing. So really excited about that. Before we get into that, though, just wanted to remind y'all about our private Facebook group that you can, if you're a listener of this show, you can join that, and you'll be able to connect with other anglers and hopefully create some fishing buddies through that and get out in the water with some new people. Other thing is, if you do love this podcast and you want to help support us financially, you can check out our Patreon page. I will link that in the YouTube notes as well as the show notes on the different podcast platforms. But that's enough of me talking. I'm going to bring on our guest here. Daniel, what's going on, man?
Not a whole lot. Just trying to survive this COVID-19 thing.
I know, man. Me too. Yeah, that's not. I feel like some people have really enjoyed the working from home, and I know other people that are like, I cannot wait to get back to work.
Yeah, I've actually enjoyed it more than I thought. I mean, I'm definitely itching to get out of the house, but I'm going to go into the office and check on everything at the plant and the warehouse this afternoon. But it's kind of nice to get up early, work for a little while, exercise, get back to work, drink some coffee. It's kind of a nice little routine.
Yeah. Yeah, you get to kind of change your workflow up a little bit. I feel like when you're at the office, like you get to the office and you're at the office for the day, but it lets you kind of flow back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
I've got some friends with some they just had kids within the past year, and they're like, oh my gosh, it is a lot to be a stay-at-home parent, staying at home with the kids all day. I'm excited to go back to my job. So it's funny, the different perspectives. Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, let's start out with let's kind of hear your backstory, where you grew up, how you got into fishing, and saltwater fishing at that, and just kind of to where you are now, if you want to take us through that journey.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool story, actually, Judd. I mean, I grew up right here. I live in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, cool. Which is right near Charleston. And I grew up in Charleston, about 5 minutes from downtown. The way I got into saltwater fishing, nobody in my family fished. We had a bunch of people, my great-grandfather, my great-uncles, my cousins, my father a little bit. They were all really into sailing and were around the water. But they had a beach house. Our family had a beach house at Sullivan's Island, which is one of the barrier islands here. It's just north of Charleston Harbor. And when I was 2 years old, I guess my dad had an old fishing rod, and he took me down to the beach to fish, and somehow we managed to snag a dead crab, and I was hooked. And that's kind of how I started fishing. Saltwater fishing was at the beach in the summertime. We would spend the month of August out at that house. Our family would stay out there in August. July 4th, we would have a big family celebration. One of my uncles used to bring a rod out and surf fish, and I'd stand in the surf with him. We'd catch pompano and whiting and spots, and occasionally a little redfish, which we would call a spot-tail bass.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of how I got into it. And growing up, we had, friends and family that had docks on the Intracoastal Waterway and tidal creeks, and we used to fish. It was just cut shrimp on a 2-hook bottom rig with a 1-ounce pyramid sinker kind of fishing.
Yep.
But every chance that I would get, I would try to convince my father to take me fishing, whether it was off of a dock or a bridge. I think I was 4 years old when I caught my first redfish, 6 years old when I caught my first flounder. In about third grade, my family moved to a house that was on the marsh, and 2 doors down from them was on a tidal creek, and all the houses had docks. So I would, go crabbing after school, learn how to throw a cast net. And when I was probably in 6th or 7th grade is when I started putting a smoke with silver flake Mr. Twister curly tail on a red lead head.
Yeah.
And caught my first red on an artificial. So that's kind of how I got started.
That's super cool, man. That's always one of my favorite parts of this podcast is, hearing different people's stories. There's a lot of I started at a little bass pond catching bass, but when you hear someone that their first experience was on salt water, it's a little rare. And even if people that grew up, around the salt water, it seems like the bass is the fish that gets most people into it. But that's funny, man. It's like as a kid, the first thing you caught on a rod and reel was a dead crab, and like it's not even about the fish. It's like, oh, I can throw this out there and like bring something back in. That I think that was like the intriguing thing as a kid, not knowing what you were going to catch. It wasn't even like, I want to go catch a redfish. It was just like the unknown of what was going to happen.
Oh yeah, and that's why I always loved, just crabbing. I mean, tying a chicken neck to a chalk line, we used to call it, with a sink, and scooping them up, or throwing a cast net in the in the tide pools out at the beach, and catching mullet and mud minnows and a shrimp occasionally and baby pompano, and just seeing what kind of falls out of the net. That was always so cool.
Right. My favorite thing as a kid, we had one of those seine nets that you could take on the beach, and when the wave washed up, stick it in the sand and catch all those little baby pompano. Man, it's so fun. Everyone on the beach would stop too and start watching. And they're like, "What are you doing? What are you catching?"
I was one of those people. I remember watching people dragging those seine nets in the surf and the tide pool, and thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I always wanted one, but I never had one.
They were pretty fun. Me and my dad used to do that together a bunch. It was good pastime. But all right. So from there, you've obviously progressed into quite the angler. Talking to Dave, I was like, because he was explaining y'all's relationship. I was like, does he fish a bunch? Like, is he an angler? Or is he more of like a just the president? He's like, oh, he's one of the best fishermen I know. So,
saying that. I'm definitely not one of the best fishermen that I know. So,
well, it just depends on the circles you run in. You got to just hang out with lesser fishermen.
Yeah, Dave must hang out with some pretty bad anglers, man.
Well, how has your story kind of led you into working in the fishing industry?
Yeah. So, and that's kind of neat, actually. It's really kind of a roundabout way. And, all through high school and everything, I was just really into fishing. When I was 13 years old, I saved up money, and I paid half, and my dad paid half. We got a 15-foot boat. That turned into a 17-foot Boston whaler when I was a junior in high school. And I started getting into, the offshore fishing stuff. I mean, taking that 17-foot whaler, 30 miles offshore, and started working on bigger boats, and worked on head boats in the summertime, and that kind of led me to college, where I studied marine biology and marine fisheries policy. I mean, that's kind of what I was into, and went back and worked on boats in the summer. Eventually, worked in labs, and my whole goal at that time was kind of a little bit of a struggle for me. Like, do I want to do something with marine biology or fisheries, or do I want to do something that will enable me to live the kind of lifestyle where I can fish all the time?
Right.
And I kind of chose the latter. I ended up, in hindsight, maybe it was a mistake, maybe it wasn't a mistake. I don't know. I guess it wasn't a mistake, because I ended up where I am now, which is amazing. But I decided to go to law school after I graduated college. And I went to law school at the University of South Carolina here in Columbia, about 2 hours away, because I knew that would get me back to Charleston quickly. And that's all I wanted to do, was get back home, get a job, buy a house, and buy a boat so I could offshore fish. So, I did that. I guess I was only 24 years old when I finished law school, moved back home, and I bought a 1981 24-foot Hydra Sports and rebuilt the transom and repowered it. And that's back before yellowfin tuna were extinct here. And now you can't catch one. But, so I was into the offshore stuff. And I practiced law for 3 years and absolutely hated it. Honestly, I mean, I was depressed. I was miserable. I was, able to do the things that I loved, but I just hated my day-to-day job. And I just got married, and I told my wife, we got married in January, and in July I quit practicing law and went to work for a company here in Charleston called the Charleston Angler. They had one shop at the time. It was like a high-end, fly fishing, light tackle, sold, Sims and Orvis and Patagonia, in addition to tackle and live shrimp and live mud minnows and all that good stuff. but they were opening their second location, and I got hired as the manager of that second location, and I knew nothing about retail, so I have no idea why they gave me the job, but I was energetic and passionate about it. And so I took that job, opened that store, managed both of their stores. We're actually in the process of opening a third store when I hit the 2-year mark at the Charleston Angler. And I told my wife that, I was going to do that for 2 years and then decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I was trying to decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I was looking at, into like medical device sales and all kind of stuff, really looking into going back to practicing law in a different area, which I didn't want to do. Honestly, the opportunity to run Z-Man really just fell in my lap. I mean, at the time, nobody had really heard of Z-Man. The company had been around. I mean, now the company's been around for about 35 years, believe it or not. But
really?
At the time, we were really just selling silicone skirts like you see on a bass jig or a bass spinnerbait. Mm-hmm. To other companies. We were making some soft plastics for Strike King. We had a lure called the Chatterbait. That's mainly a bass fishing lure, although I know from going to Louisiana, it works great for Marianne and some other places. And
Sheepshead in Louisiana, actually.
Yeah, it's crazy. Those sheepshead down there are nuts.
They're so nuts.
Eating one up here, but and the opportunity just kind of fell in my lap, right place at the right time. They were looking for somebody to run the company. It was a family company, and the president of the company at the time was basically stepping up from being the president of Z-Man to being the president of the parent company, which owns a number of other corporate entities. Gotcha. So I kind of had the opportunity to come in and the task I was given was basically, turn this company into a consumer brand so we can control our own destiny. And that was a little over 11 years ago now.
Wow. Well, you've done that, man. I mean, I don't know many people around here that don't have at least 20 packs of Z-Mans in their boat at a time. Like, it's crazy how big of a name Z-Man is now. I would say with most of the anglers, at least here on the East Coast, it's like almost a household name as far as, when you start talking about tackle and soft plastics. And I think the big thing, man, one, it's just the marketing is done so well, I believe, and the branding is done so well. Like it feels like it's keeping up with the times as far as fishing goes, which a lot of companies aren't. A lot of companies, they kind of still feel a little older.
And that's kind of one of our, it's interesting that you said that. First of all, it's so awesome to hear you say that, that we're kind of a household name because, 5 years ago we weren't. I mean, 10 years ago we definitely weren't, and that's kind of what we've been going for. From a marketing standpoint, what you mentioned really, it's true. Because we knew, 10, 11 years ago, we're not going to be able to outspend, the Berkeleys and the Strike Kings and, all these other bigger companies. We're going to have to outwork them and be more creative than they are. So that's why, like, we got on the social media bandwagon really early, like the digital video bandwagon really early. We just try to be more progressive, and we try to work harder than everybody else when it comes to marketing, and we want it to be authentic too. I mean, the fact is that whether it's me or our marketing guy Shane or our national sales manager Glenn or our plant operations manager Donnie, I mean we're all out fishing these baits on the weekends, and living the lifestyle, and we try to make it authentic.
I think that's so important, man, and it definitely feels that way when you look at the company. It feels very authentic. As to, oops, I just kicked some of my cords connected to my computer. I get nervous when I do that, but no, man, it feels so authentic. The branding is like super legit, and it feels, I don't know. There's other companies out there that just don't feel like Z-Man. Like Z-Man feels like a community. It feels like a brand, like something. It feels like a movement that people want to be a part of. Like if you're not fishing Z-Man, at least that's how it feels here in North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, good.
And so, and the diesel minnows changed my life, and just in a small way. But man, that 7-inch, I have buddies that were fishing like the 7-inch diesel minnows this winter for trout and catching big trout on the 7-inch diesel minnows. But also, I was seeing pictures of them with like 14-inch trout with a 7-inch diesel minnow hanging out of his mouth.
Yeah, I started throwing the 5-inch this past fall, and I normally don't throw. I throw a lot of smaller stuff, like our 3-inch minnows and our 4-inch jerk shad. I just kind of, fish lighter tackle and smaller stuff a lot. But I started throwing that 5-inch, which is still a pretty big profile for inshore.
Yeah.
And I was shocked I caught big trout on it, and I caught big reds on it, but I was shocked at the number of 14-inch trout and 18-inch reds that ate that.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
It makes sense with that 7-inch. I gotta give that one a shot. I know the big trout would hammer.
Oh, if you know a spot, I haven't thrown it at all, but if you know the spot, the right time of year where the spot where the big fish is, I think that's going to get him to eat. And he was throwing it a lot in the surf, so he was surf fishing with it and doing really well. I had 7 citations this winter, and 6 of them came on the 5-inch diesel minnow.
Oh, really? Yeah, I need to be throwing that now because really now through, the beginning of June is kind of our time to catch the big trout.
Yeah.
They start ganging up to spawn, and fished yesterday morning and caught a few, pretty good ones. I don't think ours get quite as big as yours do up there. Anything over 20 inches is pretty solid here.
Yeah,
and anything over 24, you're doing something special.
Right. Yeah, North Carolina, man, it's a special place for trout. And I've talked to people on the podcast about the trout here and guys from Texas, and they're like, man, if y'all had your laws straight, and I'm not going to make this a political conversation, but people wouldn't be traveling to Texas for big trout. They'd be traveling to the Pamlico Sound to catch big trout. So,
well, just the number of big trout I've seen this past year, coming from up there, mostly a little bit north of you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been pretty eye-opening to me, how many, 8-9 pound trout are being caught up there.
It's impressive. It's a stressor for me. Like every time I see one, I'm like, dang it, I gotta get up north again and fish. But that's super cool, man. Yeah, just an encouragement to y'all as a brand. I don't think there's anyone else that's doing it as well as y'all are as far as the branding and stuff goes. And I would compare it to like the Yetis and the companies like that really focus on that branding and creating a movement and a community, and I think that's what ZMAN's doing. So at least it's done that to me. So
much appreciated. That
for
means
sure.
a lot. Thank you.
For sure. So when did you make that transition? Were you inshore fishing all along when you were into the offshore fishing too, or did you kind of come back into that more when you found ZMAN?
Yeah, kind of a little bit of both. I mean, all through high school, even when I fished, started getting into offshore. I still fished inshore. One of my best friend in high school had a flats boat, which was one of the first, maybe not one of the first, but you didn't see a lot of boats with poling platforms. We were catching, tailing redfish in the grass. We were 16 years old before it was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he was using a fly rod. I wasn't at the time, but so I was always kind of into it. And I had friends. I mean, kind of my my fishing father, the guy that kind of took me under his wing fishing offshore in high school, kind of working on his boat. He fished inshore too. So I kind of did it and then got tunnel vision on the offshore stuff and, college, law school afterwards. And really kind of what drove me back, a couple of things drove me back to the inshore. One is when I worked at the Charleston Angler, I was still fishing offshore a lot, especially with customers, but started getting back into the inshore, got into, fly fishing again and, got an 8-weight to, fish for tailing reds and all that. And then when right before I started to work for Z-Man, about 2 months before, my wife and I had our son, Evan.
Yeah.
And when Evan was born, I knew that my offshore time was going to be severely curtailed. Mm-hmm. So he was born in August. I started working at Z-Man in October, and in November I bought a 2016-foot Hughes bone fisher, and
nice.
that's what's sitting directly under me right now in our garage. I still have that boat and use it every week because I knew that I wasn't going to be fishing offshore as much. And it's funny, now I'll fish offshore of Charleston 2 times a year if I'm lucky. I'll get to go to, been really lucky, get to go places like Louisiana and fish offshore down there, which I love. But I'd much rather, go out alone and fish artificials and, kind of do what I'm doing now than fish offshore. I don't know if I've just outgrown it or if it's just kind of moving on to, it seems more challenging to me. It's more rewarding. It's just a lot more fun.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool too to be a well-rounded angler, like one that's maybe not doing it all right now, but you've kind of dabbled in everything. I think it makes you a better angler all around.
And to that point, I mean, I think like being exposed to bass fishing, which I've always liked bass fishing, but I've never, it was like bass fishing in, ponds and lakes. But now being exposed to like these tournament guys and getting to, travel and fish with them. And, I've really enjoyed, fishing up north for smallmouth bass.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, made me a much better finesse fisherman, which, translates into being able to catch trout and reds in tough conditions down here. The bass fishing side of it and what I've learned from our bass guys has really helped me become a much better saltwater angler. And that's something that I think a lot of inshore guys could probably apply as well.
I would agree 100%, man. And I've said it on this podcast multiple times. Like I love the YouTube channel Tactical Bassin'. Have you ever watched that one? There's just so many good details, and they go so in depth. But man, there's almost every piece of tackle and bait that's come into the redfish world was being thrown for bass first.
Yeah.
I'm with you. And the finesse fishing, that smallmouth fishing and whatnot, it couldn't help you anymore with trout. It's right on par, and same with redfish. I mean, there's so much you can learn and apply across the board from every fisher.
Well, I mean, the other thing, too, is just watching these guys fish. I mean, I know a lot of, really good saltwater anglers. I mean, we work with a lot, and I've gotten to fish with a lot of good captains and guides and, writers and other anglers that are really accomplished. But in terms of, casting accuracy, being able to see fish, making as many casts as possible, just, being able to vary presentations, instincts. I mean, very few saltwater guys can touch what these bass guys can do. Yeah. And you share a boat with them and you realize pretty quick, I'm not very good at fishing compared to these guys. And it kind of makes you want it a little bit more. Like my favorite people to take fishing here are our bass pros, our touring bass pros. And like, I don't even like poling a boat unless one of those guys is on the front, because they're going to hit every target. They're going to see every fish. They're going to catch every fish they see. It's just crazy how good those guys are.
Yeah, it really is. It's, like a lot of saltwater guys will knock bass fishing. They're like, oh, man, bass fishing's stupid. But, man, it is so much more intense than saltwater fishing for the most part. I'm with you on that. There was, my wife could advocate for me, but there was like a year and a half, maybe it was 2 years ago. I got on this kick. I was like, I think I want to drop everything I'm doing and try to become a professional bass angler. I want to sell my skiff and get a bass boat and try to do a year of trying to do all the tournaments. And I almost had her convinced. I mean, she would have let me done it if I really, really, if I put my boat on the market and sold it, but I ended up kind of backing out of it. But it's cool, man. I just like that competitive nature and the push to be the best and to figure out how little tiny things can push you forward as a better angler. I think that's what bass anglers are so good at. So.
Yeah, I don't have that drive myself, and definitely, for me, it's not about competing or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty cool to see how intense those guys are.
Yeah, it really is. I've enjoyed watching some of y'all's videos that y'all do with some of the bass anglers, and y'all got Mark Daniels Jr., correct? He's a cool dude.
I took him. We had all our pros down in November. We did a pro staff summit. Uh-huh. C.A. Richardson came up for it. Other than that, it was all. I mean, it was I think 11 or 12 bass guys, and we had one of our guys from Canada came down. But I took Mark Daniels Jr. fishing the second day of that. And, again, it's just so cool to see these guys just, put what they know to work in my backyard and see them kick my butt.
Yeah, it's pretty cool for sure. Well, being someone who's so, when we talked about this pre-show a little bit, that's so involved in Z-Man and the products that they all have, what are some of the products that you really like to fish locally in the saltwater inshore scenario?
So the one that I find myself going to the most is, and it's not one of our more popular baits. It's our 4-inch scented jerk shad.
Okay.
We came out with that size a couple years ago, and to me, it's just like the perfect, just little bite-sized bait. I fish it on a trout eye finesse jig head that has a 1/0 hook. So it's a really short hook, so it gives the body of the bait a little bit more wiggle. And I find myself fishing that a lot. Like okay. I really like using lighter tackle, like most of the time I like a 1,000 size reel, medium light rod. I fish very little, that's very little that's more than medium light, unless I'm fishing for bigger fish out at the jetties and stuff like that. But that little combination right there, I mean, it's a blast to fish, with the light rod. I mean, yesterday I caught a 24-inch red on it, around structure, and just having to pull that fish out of there, light rod, light tackle. It just seems like to me that, when the bite's tough, they'll still eat that smaller profile. I know 4-inch doesn't sound like a small profile, but it's it's a really small, slender bait.
Yeah, definitely.
So I use that a lot. I really I like to sight fish and skinny water fish a lot. That's kind of my favorite thing to do. And we're kind of like y'all are in Wilmington, where we've got a lot of oyster shell and grass at high tide. So for that scenario, I like something that's really weedless. And the 4-inch scented paddlers is one that I always have on an 1/8 ounce 3/0 weedless weighted swim bait hook, like our Chinlocks hook, or a Mustad grip pin is another good one. Because that's something you can throw in grass. You can fish it over oysters. It's not going to get hung up much. If it does get hung up, then you can pull it free. It doesn't have a jig head that's going to bury down into the shell. Right. And it works great in Florida, where there's grass flats, or Louisiana, where you have a lot of aquatic vegetation. And the nice thing about it is, in the shallower water, it's going to sink horizontally. It's not going to sink head first, so it's going to settle down really slow. So it's a little bit more time. We see a lot of, our water's super muddy here, so we see a lot of, cruising fish, whether it's singles, groups, that are just pushing or waking. I like getting up early and going and looking for that kind of stuff. And you can put it in front of them, and, it lands really soft. It's kind of, a friend of mine said, that's a splat bait. It makes like a little splat sound that doesn't really spook the fish.
Yeah.
Put it up right in front of them. The way it hits the water, it actually kind of gets their attention rather than spooking them a lot. And it just seems to just kind of settle down real slow. And when we designed that paddlers, that was one of the first baits that I designed when I started at ZMAN, probably 9 years ago. We, at the time we were fishing a lot of, just fluke style baits. Like before I was at ZMAN, I fished a lot of the gold jerk shads and that sort of thing. But we wanted something that you could fish like that, with like just a twitch pause, just pulling it real slow through the grass. They just had a little bit of wiggle. Mm-hmm. So it's not a swim bait like the diesel minnows that has an aggressive wiggle, or not even something that I really reel steadily a whole lot. You just wanted to give it a little wiggle. So, I've probably caught more reds on that 4-inch scented paddlers than all other baits combined in the last 7 or 8 years, I think.
It's funny how you'll gravitate to one, and it ends up being really whatever. I mean, there's a lot to the bait as well, but like, you're going to catch more fish than what you throw more.
It's a confidence thing.
Yeah, it's a confidence thing. Is there any baits that y'all have that aren't necessarily marketed as a redfish bait that you've found to be productive for redfish?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's starting to catch on in saltwater more, but all the Ned rig stuff, that's really just, ultra finesse type baits. The little bait, the main one that we make, I don't know, 7 or 8 little baits. But the main one is called the finesse TRD. What guys were doing is they were cutting in half our zinkers, which are like a Senko style worm that's 5 inches long. and making this little bait, putting on a mushroom jig head, and they said it looked like a turd. That's why we called it the TRD, kind of like the turd. So, that bait works really well, and there's different variations of it. Like there's one called the hula sticks. It's a little longer, and it's got like 4 little tentacles on it. It works really well for reds. And then we make one called the Trd Crawls. It's about a 2.5-inch crawfish imitation. And we make a little head for it called the Finesse Bullets. It's a little bullet-shaped head that's on an EWG hook, so it's very weedless. And for tailing reds in the grass, or really any time they're rooting around for crustaceans, that's just a killer because, you put it in front of them, and if you've used our plastic, I know that you know this, but, it floats. That's a big, big advantage. I mean, the durability is huge, but the buoyancy, just from a functional standpoint, I mean, that's something that really allows you to catch more fish.
Oh, yeah.
And when that thing settles down on the bottom and you put it in front of a red that's rooting around, those claws they go up. They just stand right up. And, you know as well as I do that when a redfish, eats what it thinks is a crab, that's going straight back to the crushers. So they just,
annihilate it.
That thing. It's
that's
not
sweet.
Subtle at all. So I've really, it's crazy, how many, the percent, it's like 90% of the tailors that I'll put that in front of have eaten it. It's just, they always eat it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I need to try that bait. I've played around with the Ned rigs a little bit, and I've started to fish them more. I fished them a lot this winter for trout, and I need to start fishing them more for redfish. Like I get so, like with my red fishing, if I'm not sight fishing, I'm like a lot of times I'm throwing one of y'all's chatterbaits, or I'm throwing a spinnerbait or something with more presence because I'm such an impatient angler. Like I want to move through an area really quickly. And so throwing something with more presence that's going to cover the water quicker is but I've got to slow down. Like I know that's one of my biggest downfalls is because I'll be working fast with a chatterbait or a spinnerbait and seeing a mud here and then a mud there, and I'm blowing fish out that I'm working too fast for. But sometimes it's so hard for me to pick up like a soft plastic and just blind cast with like a small soft plastic. I'm like, I need to move quick. But
I have a hard time doing that too with that Ned rig. But one thing, it was really eye-opening to me. I mentioned before how our pros were up here in November, and CA was up here, and they went in in the summertime here. You get the big high tides, with the fish tail. But once you get into November, the fish aren't tailing anymore. And, they go up in the grass, and it's just hard to catch them. I mean, it's really technical to sight fish for them. And when you see them, they're laid up and usually not feeding at all. It's when they come out of the grass and you really catch them. Well, he was going up in the grass and sight fishing these fish with a Ned rig. And these were fish that I always, for the most part, they're almost uncatchable. Yeah,
just the laid up in the flooded grass fish.
Yeah. I mean,
those are tough.
You can't see them until you're on top of them. And, of course, he's seeing fish that I could never see. And he had David Walker on the boat with him one day, and Rob Jordan, who's another one of our bass pros, the next day. But I think the first day they caught like 15, they sight fished 15 reds on the Ned rig. And the second day they sight fished like 30 or 40. And that was like, man, I need to be fishing this thing more.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's impressive. I think that, when those fish aren't moving, that's when they're the hardest to catch, whether it's in that grass or just laid up on a bank. One, you don't have an angle to make a cast. You've got to be really precise. But I see so often where I'll try to sneak a bait in on a laid up fish and it spooks them. But I guess a Ned rig being smaller, moving a little less water.
Small, such a little profile, it's not going to spook them. And, it's just really non-threatening, and it looks like food,
Yeah, definitely. So when you go out, you said you got a huge redfisher, correct? Bonefisher. Are you mostly trying to sight fish, or are you spending a lot of time blind casting and covering water as well?
It depends on the tide and the conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like for me, if every morning that I went out, it was a low tide at 9 o'clock, and I could get on the water, before sunrise, around 6 or whenever that is, and fish the last part of outgoing and the first part of incoming for reds that are cruising and pushing and feeding, that would be what I would do.
We're gonna get along great, man. That's my dream scenario too.
I mean, that's like my thing. And but like yesterday, for instance, it was 6:30 a.m. high tide.
Okay.
And I was out until I had until about 9:30 to fish. So low light conditions, water in the grass. It wasn't like I could sight fish, and that's when I go and trout fish.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a good topwater bite yesterday and finished up and caught a nice red and some flounder, and it was just kind of one thing I've realized is I just go fishing whenever I can.
Yeah.
And try to make the best of it, because I'm not in a position where I can fish 3 days a week or pick the Tuesday when the tide's right.
Right.
I might have 4 hours on Sunday morning and I gotta go.
For sure. I think honestly that makes you a better angler in the long run. Like if you just always go when the conditions are perfect, it doesn't make you have to persevere through the tough times. And I think you just learn so much more when you're like struggling through a day, trying to try new stuff, try new spots, and putting some different stuff together. But that's cool. Yeah, I'm with you, man. Like if I could have that low tide early in the morning, you're the first one to the boat ramp, and you get to a spot. All you hear is the seagulls. Oh, I love it. Do y'all get the ibis? I'm so ready. It's about to start happening here. I'm sure y'all do. Where the ibis, the redfish will be pushing down the bank, and the ibis are like kind of running behind them, eating the discards of the shrimp. Yeah, that is. Yeah,
we get the seagulls on them.
Yeah.
Usually that's like an early fall kind of thing. You get some cool stuff like that. I mean, this time of year, a lot of the time, I don't know whether it's with glass minnows or what, but you get a little hatch of those, and you'll see a lot of time ibises and egrets and stuff. I don't know if it's a hatch or if they're just going in and out of the grass when the water's in the grass, but you'll be running and you'll see the birds on them, and that'll be a good place to stop, and trout and reds all mixed in, and that's fun. That should be happening the next few weeks here.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one thing I've noticed about fishing. I fish McClellansville a good bit and Bulls Bay area. It's a little bit closer. I'll drive down there some in the summer on a flood tide if I don't have anything going on and fish, and I fish the low tide up there a good bit. And that's one thing that y'all have that like the ibis, seeing the ibis behind the birds is really cool, but that's never something like, it's not like I can just cruise the banks until I see that. But down there, I've noticed like sometimes I can run an area and see birds working, and then I'm like, all right, that's where the redfish are. Or I'll see, fish push. I've been running before and seen fish waking down the side of the waterway and been able to stop and go fish those fish.
That's how I've found most of my places that I fish on the waterway. I mean, if you can, you got to have a slick, calm morning.
Right.
And usually in the fall here when they're pushing shrimp or when they're starting to gang up, and they're, in October, November, they start schooling up here and they're still pretty aggressive. By the time you get into like January, February, March, they're schooled up, but they're, kind of hunkered down. They've been hammered for a few months. But you find a slick, calm morning, especially if it's not a weekend, and you can just literally run the waterway or, any kind of open bays or shallow areas, and, the fish will just show themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's cool. Yeah, I fished that same area up towards Bulls Bay a good bit. It's only about a 30-minute drive from the house to put in there, and we've started exploring that a little bit more because it's getting just so crowded on the water, closer to town here. And then also you've got, a bunch of tarpon up there in the summer, which has been fun to try to figure that out. Although I know a lot of people have, but I just haven't had the time to get it dialed in yet.
For sure. That tarpon, man, like a tarpon up north, like South Carolina or North Carolina, is a cool fish to catch. I've been pretty sick with trying to learn how to catch them up here as well. And I've had some success, but in the ocean, I've had a lot of success in the ocean. The inshore fishing for them, it's like as soon as I feel like I've got a pattern figured out for them,
they're just gone.
They're just gone. And one bait that I hooked one on last year was the 5-inch diesel minnow.
That was the one that we hooked about. I've got this one buddy. We've been fishing together since high school, and we got it in our heads about 2 years ago that we're gonna catch one on a ZMAN soft plastic, which a lot of people have done, but we just haven't done it here in Charleston yet.
Yeah.
We've done it in places, and we've put in a lot of time, and we've been on the fish and just hadn't gotten them to eat. Well, we were fishing in July for the big bull reds out at the jetties at the mouth of Charleston Harbor, and sure enough, he hooks about 140-pound tarpon on a 5-inch diesel minnow as well. We're trying to catch red. We've been trying for 2 years to catch a tarpon, and he hooks a huge one on a 5-inch bait out there.
Did he have the hook to keep him on, or was it more of a redfish hook?
Yeah, he had it was like a 1/2 ounce redfish eye jig head, and the problem is that he had it was like maybe a medium or a medium heavy rod with a 3,000 size reel, and it was if it was like a 70, 80 pound fish, he might have had a chance, but this was like a legit
a real one,
140. So we knew there wasn't a chance, and we got a few jumps. It actually swam right at the back of the boat, and the last jump was about probably 20 or 30 feet off the boat, and another buddy of mine was out there and saw the whole thing, so that was kind of cool.
That's super cool.
But it was a neat little bite, yeah.
We had, this is just a story it just reminded me of, but just a quick story. So one of the first tarpon that we hooked on artificial up here in North Carolina was on topwater. We went to catch bait that afternoon. We were going to go fish the evening until it got dark. And could not catch bait. We had like 4 or 5 tiny pogies, like little small pogies, that we just couldn't find the bigger pogies, and couldn't find any big mullet. And so we're like, well, screw it, let's go out there. Maybe we'll throw the topwater segment for like some bluefish, cut some bluefish up, and just fish some cut bluefish on the bottom for them. And we see some bluefish kind of bust some mullet, and my buddy throws a topwater over there with like a 2500 and twitches it like 3 times, and something just kind of sucks it down. And he's like, oh, I got a bluefish, and reels tight, and like a 100-pound tarpon jumps out of the water. And he had a 2500 medium light, super light rod. And we fought the fish for a while. It was hooked really well, and got him up beside the boat. Like, he wasn't done, but he was close enough. He'd had him to the boat probably the first time we had him at the boat. And the fish jumps away from the boat one time, hits the water, and then turns around and jumps straight into my buddy's chest. Drills him in the chest. The hook went in his chest, pulled out of the tarpon, and the tarpon was in the boat freaking out. My other buddy dove on the tarpon. It was breaking rods and stuff in the boat, but we ended up landing the fish on that 20. Well, we did. I can't say we landed it. The fish ended up landing us.
It ended up getting in the boat.
In the boat. So I was like, there's no way it would have happened. So it's always like those peculiar times when the tarpon do like what you dream of them doing, every other time you're fishing. And then when you go out and try for them so hard, you get your butt kicked.
Yeah, that's pretty much my experience with them over the years.
Exactly. So if you were to go out and throw a ZMAN product for tarpon around your areas at the diesel minnow?
I want to throw that 7-inch diesel minnow for them. I just haven't really had a chance to.
Yeah.
We just kind of got that rolling. We really didn't, get it into production until, late summer, early fall. But the one that I've, thrown when I've been trying to catch them, and I've got buddies that have done pretty well, is our 10-inch heroes.
Okay.
It's just a big, slug style kind of bait.
Yeah.
And a couple of guys here have used them with some pretty good success. There's a tarpon tournament here every year, and the guy that won it last year, it's always like 30, 35 boats. And nobody ever catches more than one in a day here.
Right.
It seems like, or at least during the tournament. So it's usually the first person to catch one wins. And he caught one first thing in the morning on that 10-inch hero.
Did he?
So that'd
That's
probably
awesome.
be the one, a big pink heroes or the big purple demon, which is a black and purple. That's
Yeah. I got a bunch of those hanging in my garage.
Yeah. So that's probably what I would throw, and we've been around them, throwing them at them, but a lot of the guys in Florida really like that bait for them too.
Yeah. It's the Z-Man, the wiggle you get from that, man. I think it entices the tarpon so much because they're bait watchers. They'll get underneath whatever you're throwing and really look at it before they eat it. And sometimes they'll just smash the crap out of it as soon as they see it, but a lot of times they'll get that drop below it and come up and eat it. I've been excited to throw that 7-inch this summer too for tarpon. It seems like when I can see the tarpon really well though, I oftentimes throw a bait that's too big. It seems like they want something that's a little bit smaller, but in that dirtier water inshore and whatnot, I feel like something big that they're going to see and feel is the ticket. But I probably need to stop talking too much about tarpon fishing up in North and South Carolina, or somebody's going to come slash my tires in my driveway.
Yeah.
But well, cool, man. Well, is there anything else? Any other products that you want to go over? Anything that y'all just launched that the inshore crowd should know about?
Not really. One thing is a kind of a sneak preview.
Yeah.
This is really the first time I've mentioned it at all. But we've been working with C.A. Richardson on a new bait that I think will be a really cool profile. It's a really long, slender 6-inch bait with a forked tail. It's got kind of a segmented body like the paddlers to give it a little more wiggle, but it's really more of like CA said, the one thing that we're kind of missing in our lineup is something that's a really good, needlefish, ballyhoo kind of imitation. So, it's something along those lines.
Yeah.
Maybe come with it. Hopefully, everything going on now has kind of messed up our product launch plans because we're just getting a little bit further behind in our plant. We're hoping to launch it this summer. It'll, definitely be available by late summer, early fall. But it'll be a great bait, either fishing on a jig head or, like on a weighted swim bait style hook and as a twitch bait. I fished it a good bit, earlier in the winter and, did really well with the reds on it. It's a 6-inch bait, but it's a really long, slender profile. So we were catching, 18-inch reds on it too. So be a good trout bait. I see it being applicable for a lot of things. So that's something kind of to look out for coming down the pipe. I think we're going to call it the darters. That should be coming later this summer.
Cool.
So you heard it from here.
Yeah, I heard it from you first. I'm excited. I'm going to have to get on ordering some of those. That sounds like it'd be a good bait for snook too. Anything that's got that real quick wiggle, you can throw it up in some timber, some brush, or some mangroves, and wiggle it out real fast. It seems like a snook.
I think that's what CA had in mind for it also was snook. Yeah, snook, smaller tarpon, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, any of that darting action, small tarpon and snook it seems to be the play. Well, cool, man. We'll have to maybe one day fish together or something. But thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and your story. It's been a blast having you on here. Yeah,
it's been fun, and I'd love to fish together. It sounds like we'd have a good time. And we'd like to do a lot of the same stuff.
For sure.
Whenever you're down this way, give me a shout, and or I'll come up and meet you halfway or something.
Yeah, sounds good, man. We'll do it. We'll do it for sure. I appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna close her off here real quick, and then we can chat afterwards. But guys, thanks so much again for checking this out. If you haven't fished ZMAN fishing products, then you need to. You're blowing it. You need to go pick some up. Any of the tackle stores around you should carry them. So check them out. Thank you again, Daniel, for coming on, and we will see y'all in the next episode. Later.